And the act was crafted very well. As a matter of fact, it was crafted so well that we hardly nitpick at it, and certainly as part of Title 20 that many are not familiar with because it just operates very well. And I think the agency operates well also. But there is a part of it, and you will see it in the handout that I included, where basically in the authorization process, an institution will make an initial application to the state, to the agency. They will go through all the process that are necessary. Once they are authorized, they have to renew that license every year. What you have in front of you is the requirements of these institutions, what they have to submit to the agency every year. All my bill does is says that if there is a non-public post-secondary institution that has been operating more than 5 years in the state of Georgia, I'm going to make a parenthesis right here. Why did I choose 5 years? And it's because under the Act, any institution that begins to operate in the state of Georgia must, for the first 5 years of operation, provide a bond. They must also contribute to the tuition guarantee fund. After 5 years, they don't need to do so. So we're talking about institutions that are operating in Georgia, that have been well established and are doing well, educating adults in our state. What my bill does is that it says that if they are accredited by an accrediting body that is recognized by CHIA and by the Department of Ed, that all they have to do is submit the application with a fee, but they're exempt from having to continually, every year, submit those lists of documents. That's what the bill does.
Okay, any questions from anybody? I hear no questions, so well, here we go. Wait a minute, Chairman Amerson.
My question is why you didn't change it from every year to like every 3 or 4 years.
Well,
I mean, they've been around 5+ years.
Sure.
Why do they need it every year?
You know, Representative Amerson, it's a great question, but I think it's a broader question to the Act. All I wanted to do is really reduce the paperwork of the institutions. But I think that is a question that we can look at as far as the whole Act overall. I didn't want to go into that because the fee is collected every year. I'm sure the agency depends on that fee. And so I didn't want to go down that route. I wanted to leave things, since the Act has been working very well, I didn't want to mess that part of it. I just wanted to help the institutions in their paperwork reduction.
Representative Gardner.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. You said CHIA. What is CHIA?
CHIA is the Council on Higher Education Accountability. It is an organization, a national organization that is at par with the Department of Education. And they go through a very rigorous approval of accrediting agencies. That's all they do. And so these two bodies are basically ones that exist and are recognized. We use CHIA and Department of Ed criteria for Hope Scholarship schools. We use it for special needs scholarship schools. Pretty much credit transfer. It's accrediting bodies. Most schools will say, "Well, accept your credits if your school is accredited by an accrediting agency approved by CHIA or DOE." And so that's what that organization does.
And that's federal DOE?
That is federal.
And what is Title IV? Title
IV funds are your student loans. What happens is there are schools that want to accept Title IV funds and basically allow to accept student loan money from their students. In order for an institution to be able to process that money, they must be accredited by an institution or by an agency that is approved by CHIA or by the Department of Ed.
And that's the area that we're all concerned about, that where there's been considerable fraud. And
I can understand. I think that is an area that we could be concerned about even at the federal level, and I think that's why
We are, I meant the federal level.
yeah, I think the Department of Ed and CHIA and even the accrediting agencies are doing the most that they can to enable to make the process of accreditation very rigorous. The fact is that a school can accept Title IV funds if that accrediting agency is approved by these two organizations, mainly by the Department of Education. That is the main authorizer, I would say, of the agencies. And so the rigorous requirements that are imposed on schools through the accrediting process is something that is weeding that out. At our level, what we're doing is trying to make sure that they are authorized, even in the first 5 years, they're authorized as a sound institution, that they're not running a fake operation out of a garage kind of situation. But as far as the Title IV funds, that's beyond our purview. That is the federal government. They're the ones that are determining which schools will be able to receive those funds. And they're holding, even the federal government's holding the schools accountable directly, not just through their accreditor. And so it is a rigorous process. And certainly not something that, it's something we should be concerned about, but it's something way beyond what we could do.
May I ask one more question, Mr. Chair? This process, which looks pretty rigorous for an annual process, is it something that could be done online?
I would think so, but it's not. If you'll notice on the sheet that I handed out, notice what every institution has to do every year. They have to create a binder and put tabs on it.
I saw that.
And they got to make sure they don't put plastic covers around it. It sounds like directions we would have gotten in 1981. So sure, I think electronic means would be something that certainly the agency through the appropriations process could request.
And then they would have all this, they would have
this all the time, exactly. Now, the thing is that under the current law, any school that is regionally accredited, there's a provision, which is subsection 10, under 250.3. It's not in the law, but I mean, it's not on the bill, but I have it here. And basically, any school that's regionally accredited is exempt from the whole section. So we have arbitrarily chosen one particular accreditor. Now, I'm certainly not saying anything about the regional accreditors. SACS is very rigorous in the way they approve schools. Very, very difficult to receive regional accreditation. But what we're showing is that the accrediting process is rigorous, whether it's at the national or at the regional level. And any school that has gone through that process and has been accredited, not by an accrediting mill, but an accreditor that is recognized by the federal government, has certainly done beyond what that list requires. And so certainly to have to submit their catalog, submit this list, submit the other list every single year, simply just to be authorized every year, seems like a very tedious process that I'm surprised hasn't been seen since now. And so we're just trying to help these long-term institutions.
Those schools don't have to go through this.
Excuse me.
Those schools don't have to go through this process.
If you're SACS accredited, there's an exemption.
Okay, Representative Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I'll accept that, Mr. Chairman. Sorry. To the author of the bill, and as a follow-up to Representative Amerson's question, does the fee vary depending?
The fee is determined, and we could get more accurate from members of the agency, but the fee is determined on number of students and I believe what they charge on tuition.
And the level, collegiate.
Okay.
So could that be one of the reasons that it's done on an annual basis as compared to, let's say, biannually? The reason I'm asking is the questions that have been presented as well about
Yeah.
the redundancy of that as compared to doing it electronically appears to be the way to go. But what about some of the institutions? Have they expressed any concern about having to do this on an annual basis?
I don't think institutions are going to complain because we're talking about your authorizer. And so they're just going to do what they're asked to do.
Okay.
But certainly you see from the list, to have to do that every single year, I would even think for the agency to have to receive from DeVry and from all our different non-public institutions, every year their catalog, every year their application, every year these reports, where it's something that they have to do for their accreditors in a more substantial way.
As a follow-up, Mr. Chairman, if I could, perhaps would you be receptive to a friendly amendment that we were to change this to a biannual requirement as compared to annual?
I'm not opposed.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, at the appropriate time, I'd like to make a motion.
We've got some other folks we need to listen to. I do want to ask this question, Representative Casas, on page 2, line 33. Tell me, explain that line to me about unresolved complaints. What kind of complaints or actions are you referring to?
The Act provides that the whole reason for the agency to exist is that schools that may be operating in a not so above board way, certainly they receive complaints from students. They may receive, and mainly from students. And so those complaints are filed with the non-public post-secondary commission. And anyone that has a problem with a particular school that's a non-public entity can file those complaints with the agency.
So it can be any complaint, anything. I don't like the food they serve. I don't like the teacher. Or
I don't know what the scope of the complaints are. I think that the intent of the Act is complaints as they took my money and they gave me no education.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, I see no further questions. I'm sure there are other folks that want to speak in favor of the bill. If you will come forward and tell us your name. Anybody? Okay, come ahead, sir. If you'll tell us who you are and where you're from for the record, please. You'll need to come to the mic, please. You're on the internet. That's the reason we need to.
I'm James Flanagan. I'm president of Luther Rice Seminary. Luther Rice has been licensed in the state of Georgia for 21 years. We've been licensed in the state of Florida for 40 years. We have 1,300 students, and we are delighted to be a part of the process of licensure, but we're not delighted to be a part of the paperwork. We have been licensed by accreditation in the state of Florida for many, many years. It's worked beautifully. We do not ask to not pay our fees or dues. We simply ask to be relieved of the paperwork. We are accredited by a Department of Ed approved accrediting agency, by a CHIA approved accrediting agency. That agency is very rigorous. We do supply annual reports to that agency. We have iPads reports and all other kinds of reports that are required of any institution that is accredited by a DOE or CHIA approved accrediting agency. So I would encourage you today to consider this bill. I think the bill is an excellent bill. And again, we are not asking to be relieved of the financial burden. Our institution in over 20 years has paid in well over $100,000. We are not complaining about not being exempt. We are simply asking to be relieved of the paperwork. Thank you.
Any questions from the committee? Thank you, sir. Anybody else want to speak in favor of the bill? Yes, sir.
Mr. Chairman, my name is Benson Karanja, Karanja. I'm the president of Beulah Heights University, which used to be Beulah Heights Bible College, just near Grand Park. We have over 850 students. As my colleague said, we are accredited by two accrediting agencies, that is TRACS and also ABHE, Association of Biblical Higher Education, and both of them are recognized by Department of Education and also by CHEER. And we really want to say that we want to support the agency by paying our due, and we're not afraid of the oversight, but there's too much. We just need to be relieved the paperwork, because we do paperwork for the federal government, and also we do the paperwork for the two accrediting agencies every year. And also we have to go through the external audit to make sure that we're in compliance with the Title IV, which is one of the financial aid that is given through the federal government. We've been there since 1918, and we have always complied with everything, and we have friends and we love the agency, but it would be good for us to streamline this process and I'll be able to do all the paperwork that we normally do. The two agencies are regulars. We have peer visitors. They come and check what we're doing. And also the external auditors, they also send the report. And if we are not in compliance, the federal government will intervene on that. So, Mr. Chairman and the committee, we support this bill, and we do hope it can pass, just for the reason that we just want to reduce the paperwork that we are doing. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Any questions from the committee? I don't see any. Thank you. Okay. Dr. William C. Cruz, why don't you come and tell us about your non-public post-secondary education commission.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Let me turn you on. Okay.
We're good.
Should be.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. I appreciate the opportunity to speak about the bill. Representative Costas and I did have an opportunity to talk, I think a couple of weeks ago, about the bill, and I expressed my concerns to him then. I think in principle or in concept it's not a bad idea. As a matter of fact, as mentioned, it is been enacted in Florida for a few years. As a matter of fact, when it first came out with Florida, I checked into it, figured out what the ramifications were in Florida, decided that at that time that it was not a good thing for us to do in Georgia because of the way we do regulate. I want to speak a little bit about the Non-Public Post-Secondary Education Act and just kind of give you a brief summary of it. The reason that the act was, and some of you may have been on the in the General Assembly at that time, I'm not sure, but I was not around, however, but the reason that it was enacted in the first place was the abuses that were going with the Title IV funds. When the for-profit colleges and schools were able to get Title IV funds, that's when some abuses started, and that was one of the whole reasons why the act was initiated to start with. For example, students would get off of a MARTA bus and someone would sign them up thinking they were going to go to some school, and they end up signing a student loan, and then about 3 or 4 years later the school was gone or maybe left immediately. In any case, that's the reason that we even have such an agency. I think Representative Costas did mention that the fact that you don't know about us is really probably because we've been doing a pretty good job for the last 20 years. But in any case, I'm not so opposed to the concept. I just think that we need to think it through. And I think that we need another year to do that, to get it completely, fully vetted, figure out what the ins and outs are, how it might affect us negatively. I'm really concerned. I think my biggest concern is the unintended consequences. This industry, the last time I added up all the gross tuitions of all the schools that we regulated, and most of the ones we regulate are for profit. Now, Luther Rice and Beulah Heights are exemplary, and they do a really good job, but they are not for-profit institutions. Just know that. It's a little different. The last time I added it up, the annual amount that was generated was $695 million. We will soon be a billion-dollar industry in this state. No one knows about it. And we have a staff of 6 full-timers right now, and we're regulating that industry. Now, I do want to speak to the plastic binders and so forth. I understand that concern. We would have already had this online, our process 4 or 5 years ago, but as you know, the budget cuts were killing us. We lost a couple of our staff, and we were just struggling like any other agency to keep going and to do what we're supposed to do. We do make annual visits, and that is a very, very good thing. The creditors typically will go in 5 years, 10 years. The reason it's not the Beulah Heights and the schools that we're concerned about. It's the schools that aren't doing that job, that do have the abuses with the federal financial aid fund. And just because you're accredited does not mean that you're exemplary. And by the way, there are accrediting commissions and there are accrediting commissions, and they're not all the same. And in my head, I have a pecking order, and some I would trust. Matter of fact, Florida, they have their process is they approve the accrediting agencies. So they don't just take a carte blanche that if you're accredited by the U.S. Department of Education or CHIA, then you're good. And matter of fact, they have one that they do not approve. That would be the kind of thing we'd want to look at. Do we want to include that in such a bill? On and on. I think that the citizens of Georgia, the students that attend our schools, that we regulate, that this over the years this has served us extremely well. 21 years. And sure, there's some paperwork. There's whatever you do, there's paperwork, and there might be ways to streamline the paperwork, and the online process would be a wonderful way to do that. And we're not that far away from being able to do that. But to completely change the way we operate, that has worked very well. I used to be a school teacher. When I started to teach in that first year, my principal, 4th period, put me out in the parking lot. He gave me an extra planning period. I said, Mr. Hofford, why do I need to do that? He said, I just want you to walk around. Okay? And that's what we are. The fact that we're here, we are a deterrent to schools that don't do a good job. And by the way, most of the schools that we regulate, the for-profits, do a very good job. And please understand that I'm not trying to trash them here, but I'm saying that the fact that you're there, it does act as a deterrent. The law has worked well. It serves the students and citizens of Georgia well. And I think I'd like to work with Representative Cassis and look at this for a year, see if there's some ways we can tweak this thing to make it a little more manageable from our perspective. But let's don't do something that are going to be unintended and that we haven't thought through. I'll be happy to answer any questions, Mr. Chair.
How many schools do you regulate?
Right now we got 298.
Okay. How many are not-for-profit?
That's a good question. By the way, we don't really separate. In our head, we don't look at it, is it a for-profit or not-for-profit. If it's under the statutes that we have to regulate them, then we do that. I would say probably 10% of that 200, and that's almost 300, probably. Now, we do have, for example, Troy State, the Central Michigans that come into the state of Georgia. We regulate them, even though they might be not-for-profit, but it's just the way they're chartered. In essence, they probably generate some income for those off-campus centers, I would guess.
Okay. And as far as the audit, do you do the audit internally, or do y'all, Representative Costas kept talking about the external audit. Who's responsible for the external audit, the federal government or the state of Georgia?
Well, I'm not sure what we do is we go in every year and we do an audit, basically an academic, and we look at their financial records. They have to present to us, we call our Exhibit K, or a bona fide audit. And if we think there's a problem, then we will contract with an auditor to go in and really check it out seriously. But it's more of a, it's not an every year do we go into this extensive process. The biggest process is at the beginning. That's when a school comes. That's when we go through a very, very rigorous making sure that the school has abided by the standards that are provided, as accreditors do. But this rigor that every year does not have. I mean, I'm not saying we don't do our job, but I'm just saying that we don't. It's not as rigorous as that up front, that very beginning.
Okay. The other question: has this code section been changed since? Excuse me, Amos. Since 1990 at all? Has it been tweaked at all?
It has been tweaked some. There's been some I would say minor changes. For example, I think in 2003 or 4 we changed the amount of the tuition guarantee trust fund, what the limits could be. It was raised and
okay.
That sort of thing.
So okay. All right, Representative Garner. Wait a minute, Representative Gardner, your mic, did you cut it on the back?
Oh, there it is. Okay. Thank you again, Mr. Chairman, for helping me learn to use the mic. I am concerned about the Title IV funding, which basically is federal dollars that get used. I mean, part of the reason to get accreditation is because of the federal dollars.
Absolutely.
And you mentioned that this is almost a $700 million industry in Georgia. How much of that $700 million comes from federal loans?
Well, the vast majority.
So most of the money that comes into Georgia comes from federal loans to the students who are enrolled.
I can get that for you, but basically there's 3 ways the student pays. They pay for cash. They have Title IV funds, which by the way are the Pell Grant and the entitlement programs, as well as the guaranteed student loans that are guaranteed by the U.S. Department of Education, and then alternative loans.
And is it true what I hear about these loans, that they are with you for a lifetime, that if you somehow do not pay the loan back, I mean, you never get a checking account, you never lease an apartment?
Well, I don't want to speak for the federal government, but yeah, there are some, like for bankruptcy, that even though you would file bankruptcy, that you still would be obligated for those student loans.
You're still obligated to the federal government to pay these loans back.
Now, I will say this, that if a school closes, and that's one of the big nightmares that we have as a regulator, that the school closes and we didn't know about it. And by the way, schools close all the time in an orderly fashion, teach out their students. It's not an issue. But those ones that close overnight, that's a big concern. But if a school does close and they're under federal funds, then those loans can be forgiven by the federal government.
Can be.
Yes, and typically are.
Uh-huh. May I ask an additional question, Mr. Chairman? Again, updating the process to get it online to make it easy to file this paperwork. I wasn't really clear why this bill came up, because the people, I mean, apparently nobody complains. But it does sound like the online process might be helpful in making it easier on the people who do find it burdensome. How far away are you from getting the process online and more efficient? It's all about the funding, but I think that we could get that. We will get that started next year, at least in the initial phase. But the problem is the funds, and I'll just say this: where that fund would come from, we have a tuition guarantee trust fund, which is basically contributed. The schools have to contribute in the first 5 years of their existence, and our board has suggested that we use some of those funds to help get this started, not the whole, kit and caboodle, but the beginning of it. So I think we can get the initial parts of it done. But you're talking about a website and online, and by the way, very few states actually do this. So far, because of the cost, I mean, you're talking about a probably $125,000, $150,000 project to do it right. It's like making a reservation through Delta, and all the ins and outs that seem so simple when you're doing it yourself, but all the infrastructure that has to be built in. So we have been, some money has been obligated, $25,000. I'll tell you the amount has been obligated. So we're not
we're not there yet, but we can certainly get it going. And another thing we could do, let me just say this, Mr. Chair, if I could, and Representative Gardner, I'm on the national board of folks that do what I do, state regulars, and there's a couple of things that are working on right now. One of them is a common forms initiative where all the states that would buy into this would use a common form for, let's say the faculty credential, and it would be almost a generic. That would be, so then a school that's particularly a multi-campus, multi-state school could fill out this one form and be good. Another one is reciprocity. There's a lot of talk about reciprocity between the states, and that issue is really more about trust. In other words, do I trust Tennessee or Florida to do, if they authorize it, were we going to accept it, and vice versa? And by the way, I would be okay with Florida and Tennessee, but there's a couple others I would not. So,
Got it.
Okay, I see no further questions. Thank you for being here, Doctor.
Thank you, Mr.
Anybody
Chair.
else want to speak against the bill? Okay. Representative Casas, you want to come back and rebut anything you need to?
Certainly, Mr. Chairman. Again, as you can see, we have an agency, a commission that's doing a very good job in authorizing and regulating what we're doing here in the state of Georgia. But there are some things that were mentioned. It is true, at the beginning of the process, it's very rigorous, and schools have to go through a rigorous application process for the authorization. Schools have to go through a rigorous process through accreditation. Certainly not all the schools, of course I don't know the numbers, I don't know if Dr. Cruz does, but not all the schools that are authorized in the state of Georgia are accredited. And so we're talking about the select group of schools that have been operating in the state of Georgia for more than 5 years in an exemplary manner. They've done this filing for 5 years. They've contributed the necessary time into the tuition guarantee fund. It has given us time to see if they're a good institution, if they're growing, and if they're doing their job. Then you add to that accreditation. I understand the concerns that were presented as far as the accrediting agencies, but here I have 2 letters, one from the Department of Education, one from the Council on Higher Education, and they confirm that the process they put SACS through, they put ABHE through, they put TRACS through, meaning that SACS accreditation is as rigorous, being authorized as an accrediting agency as any other agency that has been recognized by the federal government. And so therefore, we're not talking about mom and pop operations. We're talking about established institutions like the 2 that spoke today. And all we're doing here is, number one, providing them not exemption, relief. They still have to file the application. They still have to file the fee. And if they have a change in their program, they have to resubmit this information again. So we're talking about those that are just operating and have been operating steadily for years in our state. We can wait for the 50 states to come up with reciprocity. We could wait for 50 states to come up with a common form. Good luck. We can't even decide on river water. So the institutions need relief. And this is a very simple thing. It's working in Florida. This is exact language from Florida with a few tweaks to match what we do here. But we're just saying, if you're accredited, we will license you, because we believe those accreditors are requiring a lot of these institutions themselves, as you heard here. So with that, members of the committee and Mr. Chairman, I submit this bill and ask you for your favorable consideration.
Hey, thank you. I hear any other discussion by the committee? What is the favor of the committee at this time? We'll do that at the appropriate time. All right, got a motion? Need a second? Got a second. Discussion? You want to bring up your amendment, Representative Murphy?
Mr. Chairman, after hearing some additional testimony and considering that we are constantly getting new institutions coming into Georgia, the annual renewal registration with the appropriate changes as it relates to technology would be appropriate. So until we can work that process out,
Okay.
I will prefer that.
Okay. Representative Garner?
So the way we're passing this bill, they wouldn't have to apply unless they change something. They wouldn't have to reapply.
They would annually still have to submit the application and the fee. The only thing, all the paperwork that's required outside of what the accreditor requires would be if they have a change in program.
And that's forever.
That's correct.
Is there a transitional time that you would consider?
That would, again, would be,
I mean, 5 years,
to me,
2
would be an
years?
arbitrary number, but I don't know.
I mean, things change
But-
over
and
time,
they do, and I would submit that I don't think any institution of higher education will do the same thing for 20 years.
Let's hope not. Yeah.
Yeah, I believe that degree programs change, new programs are added, and so anything like that will require, you'll see it on 41 of the bill. An institution that's granted this authorization to operate by means of accreditation shall be required to apply for and obtain a regular authorization should anything change.
Does the agency have the, may I ask more questions?
Who, the author? Yes.
I mean, do you believe the agency has the resources to check on them? I mean, are they authorized to go in once they've accredited?
Well, certainly if a complaint is filed, imagine, I would submit that this provision could go on forever if an institution doesn't change, but you could certainly go on forever without an institution ever having a complaint.
I mean, what I'm responding to are the constituent complaints
Sure.
I have about the loans, and I understand the loans is a federal government program, but the purpose of this accreditation is to ensure that the colleges that are getting this funding are appropriately informing students of what the loans mean and all those things. And I've just heard some awful horror stories.
I totally share that concern, Representative Gardner. But I believe that the accreditors and even the federal government themselves have a greater stake in seeking out these institutions. I mean, they have been clamping down very, very strongly on student learning outcomes, on making sure that the institutions are abiding, by the letter of the law as to what they're doing, because they are receiving these federal funds. We have student loans reaching almost $1 trillion here, and so it is something that the Department of Education is looking very clearly at, and I believe that even within the Act, we don't even blink as to what Sachs is doing.
That's another issue too, but yeah.
And so and again, I believe that Sachs is an amazing accreditor. What we're doing is we're not asking for exemption. Sachs has exemption. We're not asking for exemption. We're just asking for relief.
Okay, I think they'll get relief, Representative Gardner, when they get it online. So I think the doctor's heard that, and maybe he can ask the institutions to help fund putting it online.
They're making plenty of money.
Yep. Okay, we got a motion and a second. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, like sign. Bill passes. Thank you.